Hey, Dad.
Hey, what, Logan?
So, what is a missionary's favorite vehicle?
Vehicle? I don't know, what?
A convertible.
Convertible. You're grounded.
Rude.
You're listening to The Wayward Willis with Jon and Logan, where two atheists discuss religion, culture, and maybe some politics. If you're offended by blasphemy, profanity, or you hate fun, this podcast may not be right for you. And now, on to the show.
Hey, you.
It's us, your friendly neighborhood atheists.
I'm your host, John Willis.
And I'm the comic relief, Logan Willis.
And today we're going to talk about something that affects most of the planet, whether you like it or not. Religion.
My favorite thing. So, what even is religion?
Well, it's a club you join that takes your time and money and promises you'll get it all back after you die.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Seriously, though, it turns out that's not the easiest question to answer. The dictionary defines religion as the service and worship of a god, or the supernatural, or commitment or devotion to religious faith and observance. I hate it when the dictionary uses the word in its own definition. My Words with Friends word of the day is kadi. And you know what the definition is? Kadi. What did I learn today? Not a goddamn thing.
Except that Kadi is apparently spelled with a Q, and is a word, and doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, but if you give me a word that starts with a K and then change it to a Q, is that really defining the word?
I mean, apparently.
Okay,
religion equals religion.
Yeah, I was too lazy to look that word up anyway, so I still don't even know what kadi means.
Oh, man.
Anyway, because that's a lame definition of religion, we could reduce it down to say that religion is a system of organization and rituals based on a shared belief in a god or a collection of gods. And sometimes a few of these gods split off and become Avengers or join the Justice League.
Shout out to Thor, the laziest Avenger of them all.
My boy Thor.
Oh, God, no. Never again.
Am I too old for that?
Yeah, you are well past the my boy age.
No more my boys.
Just leave it to me. I got you.
All right.
My boy Thor.
Anyway, when we're talking about religion, we're not talking about belief. We're talking about the organization of believers. Pretty much all religions have a few things in common. They have belief in a higher power or powers, hypotheses on creation, sacred texts that often provide a moral framework, rituals, and concepts of an afterlife. Sometimes the higher power can be a personal god who messes around with humans for fun and profit, but sometimes the higher power is more of an impersonal, quote, first mover who doesn't really interfere. It would be like the plunger on a pinball table that launches the ball into play and then doesn't really factor into your game until you lose.
So basically we're talking about the god who created the people and sent them on the earth and said go do some stuff and then just disappeared for millions of years.
Yeah, basically.
Gotcha.
And a lot of times you would classify that as deism, but deism's kind of hard to pin down, and I don't want to talk about that right now.
We'll stick a pin in it.
We'll stick a pin in that ball.
What?
Okay, so religion has been around for all recorded human history. We know about ancient religions all the way back to the Sumerians around 3000 BCE and all the way up to the most recent Western religions like Mormons in the 1800s and Scientology, which has only been around since 1955.
Both of which are my favorite religions.
You can have two favorite religions?
I mean, if your favorite religions are things that you like to make jokes about and talk about how crazy they are.
Well, I never thought about it that way, but, I have two favorite sons.
Oh, rude. That's so mean.
You're my, tallest favorite son.
Nope, you're not getting browning points at this point. You lost it.
Son of a... All right, at this point, I'd like to just put a side note out here. If listeners are interested in the craziness of Mormonism, I want to give a shout out to Bryce Blankenagel of the Naked Mormonism podcast. It is a really good podcast. I'm putting the link in the show notes. And then, as another side note, if listeners are interested in the craziness of Scientology, I want to give a shout out to Chris Shelton's YouTube channel. You should look him up. He's got some great stuff, and I'm linking his channel in the show notes as well. Back to the show. Ancient religions claim to interact with these gods directly. Like, some even claim that gods had sex with humans and created demigods. But there's a suspicious inverse relationship between technology and deities, where the better technology gets, especially communication, the less involved gods seem to be. Since nobody seriously claims nowadays that they walk and talk bodily with gods, why do you think, Logan, that people would still believe in them despite an overwhelming lack of evidence?
Probably because people are pig-headed. The same reason that people still, quote-unquote... Well, That's probably a bad example. I was going to say believe in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, but people like who are grown adults don't genuinely believe in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny.
Well, so...
Which begs the question, why? Anyway.
It's actually really interesting that you bring that up because, first of all, believers hate it when you talk about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny when you're talking about gods. But there are some really apt comparisons that you could make between that set of beliefs and why somebody believes them, and a God belief and why somebody would believe that.
That's actually why I said that, because as a kid growing up not knowing a whole lot about anything really, aside from what your parents tell you, especially when you're the impressionable stages, all you know is my parents said there's a person who drops presents off at my house in the middle of the night on Christmas, and that's what happens. So if that's all you knew growing up and nobody really contradicted that until you got older and they were like, hey, are you kidding me? Santa Claus totally isn't real. Then that's pretty much what you're going to believe in. And I feel like that's sort of where this is going, is that people who are religious and genuinely believe in religion and have this like hardcore faith, they haven't had somebody like sit them down and give them the hardcore Santa doesn't exist talk, and all they know is what their parents taught them about Santa growing up.
Well,
I feel like
that they would be okay with losing their God belief if you told them that they would still get presents anyway?
Probably. All the presents. No,
well,
just kidding. Some people probably would definitely not do that. Probably would definitely not.
All right. So more specifically, there are a few reasons why people still buy into religion. The biggest one, and the most positive one, is community. So like-minded believers, inside and outside of religion, tend to stick together and form communities that provide support. Since humans are social creatures, it feels good to be a part of a group and bad to be alone. So having the same invisible friend is an incredible bonding mechanism. There have been studies about the happiness and longevity of religious people versus non-religious people that, first of all, are flawed, but they show what I believe is a correlation between having a social support group and being one of, quote, the others. Religions capitalize on this as well and use tactics like shame, shunning, and exile to keep members in line.
So basically just like the cool kids table in high school.
Yeah.
So, oh, man.
I mean, how many people do you know who have left their religion only to find that they're essentially cut off from family and friends, whether it's emotional or financial abandonment, or in the case of Scientology, outright attack and defamation?
Well, definitely at least one other person, because that's almost exactly what happened to Christine. Her entire family is basically like, oh, well, you're the worst person in the world, and we're not going to support you anymore.
Yeah, and that's really not all that uncommon.
That definitely seems that way as far as I've heard.
Another reason that people can buy into religion is a perceived explanatory power of the God hypothesis. For most of human history, we haven't had the answers to most questions. Considering humans have existed for 200,000 years, and we've only had the scientific method for about the last 2,000, we've been saying, I don't know, for longer than we've been able to say, I know. Most people are uncomfortable with not having an answer, and in most cases, they'd rather have a bullshit answer than none at all. Religion is so good at this. Don't know why something happens? God, checkmate, atheists.
It's just Santa Claus all over again.
Yeah, well, and it also leads into a discussion on the God of the Gaps argument, which will be fun for a later episode. Maybe another pin.
Is that a god who rules all of the cracks in the sidewalk?
I don't know if that joke really works.
I don't know.
So another reason, and this is kind of our first negative reason, is fear. And I think fear is the easiest answer, though it's so obvious it almost seems cliche. The fact is, humans are afraid of a lot of things. Chief among them is death. Those religions that offer a belief in an afterlife offer the adherents a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card by positing that you don't really die, per se. You just move on to another plane of existence. Some religions just keep giving you redos, which I guess makes people feel like death is more of an opportunity and an adventure than a loss.
Well, this is definitely one that I'm more familiar with because, as I'm sure I'll go into detail in a later episode, basically my biggest run-in with religion was at a Bible study camp. And basically I, quote-unquote, found God by sitting through a long speech where I was told that I would basically burn in hell for the rest of my life if I didn't accept God into my heart as my savior.
It was such a proud day for me when you joined the flock.
Yeah, this little 7-year-old Logan who had terrible nightmares of being on fire for the rest of his life.
Yeah, there you go. Positive aspect of religion.
Yay, recruiting!
So another reason for religion to even exist would be control. So people want to feel like if they can't be in charge, that there's at least someone or something that is, and it feels better to think that the thing in charge has your best interest at heart. Sort of like the anti-Trump, like a dictator, but he actually gives a fuck about you.
That'd be nice.
You know, the anti-Jehovah, because we can talk about how wonderful that guy is too.
Or just President Obama. 4 more years.
Yes, we can.
But not really.
Yeah, we can't anymore.
Because our political system is garbage.
Term limits. All right. The problem with religion filling this need is that it becomes opportunistic and it capitalizes on the amount of control it has over its followers, dictating heavily on things like sex, politics, and child rearing. So, Logan.
Yeah?
You know what you call a religion nobody follows anymore?
Is this a bad pun?
No, the answer is mythology. Sorry, Zeus, you had a good run. So when we talk about Greek, Roman, and Norse mythology, we don't really talk about them as religions anymore, but just stories about how people used to believe silly things while, you know, people around us still think they're having conversations with invisible friends.
Except for Thor.
Not silly.
Thor, who is definitely real, and
Thor.
on the Avengers.
Wow, we just went full circle.
Yeah, we did. It's gonna keep coming back, don't you worry.
Yep, well, you know, maybe someday modern religions will be looked at the same way.
Like the Avengers?
Yeah, like the Avengers. We'll be like, man, religions are badass, and they fight crime.
If you want to talk about community, perceived power, fear, and control, the Avengers, I would say check all of those boxes.
Okay, so this podcast for our listeners just became a comic book podcast, and we will be discussing the morality of the Avengers.
No, actually, we just started a new religion. It's called Avengerism.
Avengerism. All right.
We've got this. Let's start recruiting.
I'm setting up the 501c3 right now.
Awesome. Let's do this.
Tax-free!
My boy.
Oh, yeah, I can't do that.
Yeah, you gotta calm down, bro.
All right. I'm calm. Wait. All right, calm.
Zen.
All right, in the United States, we're most familiar with monotheistic, Abrahamic religions, where there's just one God figure that makes the rules and doles out the punishments in the afterlife. It's important to note that there isn't even one religion that can be called Christianity, because there are hundreds of denominations that all have slightly different religious ideology, and in some cases think the other denominations are wrong and going to hell, because they don't believe the right way, I guess.
That's honestly the most confusing thing for me when it comes to religions. Like when I was a kid, I actually got pushed down on the playground because some guy who was a Christian had huge problems with this other guy who was a Catholic. I was like, wait, don't you guys pretty much believe in the same thing? And they got super salty and literally pushed me down on the ground.
So, when you were on the ground, did the guy stand over you and say, Jesus loves you?
No, I wish. It would have made it more frightening, honestly.
Yeah, it would be terrifying.
Oh, man. That's how people should get bullied from now on. Just run up to people and scream in their face, Jesus loves you. The blood of the Lamb!
Oh, man, that's bad. With Christianity, Islam, Mormonism, Scientology, and even to a certain extent Jehovah's Witnesses all trying to get a bigger and bigger voice in America, you end up essentially with a mess of differing opinions on basically the same thing, driving policy decisions in government that don't in any way represent the majority of Americans. That's why people like me and organizations like the Freedom from Religion Foundation are very interested in getting more secular humanist ideas into the marketplace. I don't think that religion benefits society in the political arena.
I would say that you're absolutely correct, because based on at least my perception of a person in the millennial generation right now, it seems like we as a generation are starting to stray further and further away from the concept of religion and focusing more on our day-to-day lives. And I think that that's a good thing, but we'll see how far that goes.
Find that a lot of religious people, particularly older religious people, would just tell you that makes you self-involved.
Well, they're probably not wrong. But it is what it is.
You're probably not wrong. And that's going to lead us into our interview segment, where I say goodbye to Logan for just a little bit, and we'll be right back. Today I'm talking to Logan's friend Mike, who volunteered some of his time to share his experience with religion. I wanted to get you on the line because the other day we had a really shitty Facebook conversation about religion that ties into our first episode. But like all Facebook conversations didn't go anywhere, and we never even finished it. But anyway, while we were talking, you had posited that religion has societal benefits, but present-day religion is kind of garbo compared to pre-Nixon religion.
I should say there specifically, and I think a lot of the confusion that came, and again, I'm sorry if I came off as harsh. To clarify, I think religion exists, specifically like the theistic God, I guess is what we're talking about here, exists both philosophically and then politically. I think politically it's hard to say like a neutral force, but like historically it's been used as an ideology to justify power that was already there, at least in my opinion, and was constructed post hoc after an oppressive power system had already emerged. Whereas starting with the moral majority and the Falwell moment kind of in response to the civil rights era, basically, and the sexual revolution in America, you start to see Christianity flex its political muscle. And if you just look at their slate of political objectives, they're all very destructive. And that's super obvious. Like you can look at what they've been trying to accomplish from not only in just, like what they're focusing on. Like, I don't think these are real, I don't want to say these aren't real issues, but, like in 2017, we shouldn't have to, explain that, gay people getting married isn't a big deal. We shouldn't have to, in my opinion, spend so much time fighting over the, the sanctity of life in terms of the utility of abortion. And I think that since the late 70s, you've seen the metamorphosis, basically, of Christianity in particular into a very toxic political force whose muscles had not quite flexed, even, in the 200 years leading up throughout American history. In an organized way, it exerted tremendous cultural influence and was always used to justify all manner of heinous things. But I think it is important to recognize that it was on both sides of the divide of the oppression. Like, it was used to justify slavery, and at the same time, religious theistic doctrines provided comfort and support for the people most affected and victimized by those oppressive systems. And that's been true like throughout a lot of history, and there's a lot of really complicated psychological reasons for that. But basically, I should say that I'm not trying to defend religion as either a political or a philosophical force. I'm merely trying to say that they have had successes in a lot of fields that liberals and progressive, secular ideologies, I think, need successes in. If we're going to take like the politics of power and actually, getting people around to our ideology and seeing our ideology drive public policy, if we want all that to happen, I think it's worth learning from some of their movements and the way that they've built in the course of, a few years out of church networks, like being able to leverage that into this massive political apparatus that does the damage and that puts people into office that we see today. I'm jealous of that to a large degree, and I would love to see a machine like that built positive social programs. And I guess I just think that people can keep their religions. I describe myself as, I guess, a friendly atheist. I don't think philosophically it's inherently irrational to believe in God. I think there are people whose life experiences simply have not given them the tools to adequately question that. And I think that for a lot of people, after you've just grown up for so long thinking that way, it takes almost a major trauma to shake it from you psychologically. And I just haven't seen a whole lot of evidence of people losing faith and seeing it reliably replaced to believe that is what needs to be attacked. I think there are institutional and power realities of how political structures form. And I think that ideologies, religion included, are warped and constructed, out of, even not warped, just built purely to serve those power systems.
Right. I think where I might challenge you on what you just said is that you haven't seen a system that replaces religion in people's lives. I mean, something to that effect where, if somebody is going to break from their religion, then you kind of have to have something to fill that in. And I think that I would challenge you on that on the grounds of the destructive force of religion. And obviously this isn't the case all the time, but I mean, we can find plenty of examples, especially in the political realm, of religion that is just completely destructive. And I would say, you know, if a person that were subscribing to that would lose that religion, it would almost be like losing cancer. I mean, do you really need to replace cancer with something else, or can you just excise it?
I guess I should, to continue the cancer analogy, because I think that is kind of apt. It's more like at a certain point, the cancer is so severe that to excise it would cause serious and like very considerable damage to the host. And at some point, you have to be like, is it worth removing this cancer? Do I have anything left once it's gone? And I believe truly, 100%, that humanism and science, like just honest to God philosophy, can replace theistic religion,
right,
as a positive system.
Yeah,
and I guess for me,
you know, my argument would be that whatever connotations that you think secular humanism carries with it, and I know that in the religious realm, when you talk about humanism, there's a lot of pushback there because,
right,
you know, the word humanism means that, you know, you're putting yourself above gods, which, you know, honestly, I don't have a problem with. But, you know, whatever stigma you may attach to the term secular humanism, keeping our focus there is really going to alleviate a lot of the problems that we see coming out of religion or because of religion. And I think, to get back to your point, because I think maybe it's good to provide sort of a foundational basis for this conversation, is, you know, religion is not wholly bad. It provides systems of social support and community, kind of a moral framework, however it is that you feel about that, because I would argue that not all religious morality is worthwhile, let alone even valid.
I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah. So, you know, if you want to argue the benefits of religion, I think that you almost need to just take it down to the individual level, because from what I see and from what I experience, religion is, I think that it really just gets into the political realm too easily, because it's already a system of organization and a system of control.
I can see where that comes from, and I would actually believe it more strongly if they hadn't remained apolitical for so long. Except for in the Northeast, where the Puritans kind of like ran things, the church was not a major political force behind many issues before World War II. Like even the Catholics struggled, you know, to break into the higher levels of any kind of legislation or executive offices.
Well, yeah, but the Catholics have their own country.
Right, but within, it is at least, I guess I shouldn't say, and this is where I probably came off last time as being more pro-religion than I meant to be. I guess I'm trying more accurately to say that I think that morality is independent of theism. I think that you can have, you know, I know plenty of theists who don't engage with their religion philosophically. It's a purely cultural relic, basically, and they would be, you know, social pariahs to abandon that, and they make their ethics work within it, and they make their own sense of what's right and what's wrong within that framework.
Right, and
but I guess
that's kind of where our conversation went into, you know, cherry picking and, you know, trying to get kind of a holistic look at the religious tenets overall and where a person might depart from that. And what I had said, and I would hold to, is that people who are religious and moral are moral anyway. I don't think that...
But I guess I should say that the introduction of religion will not destroy the morality of a good person. Inherently.
Yeah, for the most part, I would say that's true. I mean, have you ever heard the saying, good people will do good, bad people will do bad, but for a good person to do bad, it takes religion?
Yes. It's interesting for me, I guess, to be in this position, in this conversation at this point in my life. 4 years ago, I was an avid follower, and I still do love the man, and may he rest in peace. Christopher Hitchens was one of my major philosophical foundations and his very vehement anti-theism. Like one of the first really like interesting books that I read that made me ask more questions was Dawkins' Selfish Gene and his the God Delusion.
Right.
So I'm very familiar with religions, and in fact I'm on Facebook probably a year ago calling the Catholic Church in fact the worst thing that has ever happened, like proper nouns. But
right, and a lot of people, I think I would agree with you as well. I think, can we take just a quick step back and kind of fill in a gap in my knowledge, at least, as to what your history with religion is?
Me personally, I grew up in a kind of half-hearted, typical suburban theist Christian household where we were specifically confirmed Lutheran, which is interesting because most of the Lutheran faith is explaining why you're not, in fact, a Catholic.
Right. It's almost like
Catholic.
methinks the lady doth object too much.
Exactly, right. And they'll be like, this is what the Catholics do, isn't it silly? And then here, we do this thing where all the words are different, but it's exactly the same and it's way better. And I'm just like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of weird.
Right.
And so for me, yeah, I never experienced firsthand, like, its oppression. For me, it was a personal anxiety of the torture of hell, basically, of making, you know what I mean? Because I felt like I took that reality more seriously as a child.
Right. Now, give me an age on that, because I think it's important to really put that in context.
So I'm really bad at remembering the order and ages of my childhood. I was confirmed in 7th grade,
okay,
which is older than most kids get because Lutherans confirm late because they want you to actually understand it. And actually, I give the guy my pastor was a very smart man and very well read and informed about his religion and knew it inside and out and was very informative and answered all my questions. And I learned a lot about Lutheranism. And I guess for me, what started to drive the nail in Christianity was just history. If I was born in India, I'd probably be a Hindu. Like, seeing the cultural ties to religion made a lot more sense to me, basically, right, than the idea that there had been one God. And then for a while, my first intellectual heroes were our founding fathers. I was like a real bullshit libertarian in my late high school years. And so I was more attracted to this kind of deistic God because I wasn't quite ready to get rid of an idea of God. But the idea of hell really had bothered me, and especially when I found out that my friends, because I didn't really have friends as a young, elementary school age kid. I didn't really have friends until the end of middle school. So by that point, I was like, are they seriously going to hell? Because they weren't religious, and they were kind of like, wait, what, you still believe? It was like Santa Claus to them.
Right.
And they were good people, you know what I mean? Like my parents even liked them, and my mom was always super judgmental of, not in a really overt way, but she was, she worried about who her kid was hanging out with.
Right.
And she, she thought they were all great. They're all super smart, gifted kids, played instruments. When now I know for a fact, actually, I'll go on to do great things, but you could tell that even in 6th grade. And I was like, are you telling me all these people are going to hell? It doesn't make any goddamn sense.
Right.
And so for a while I went through kind of a big existential crisis because I just felt like I wasn't getting it. Like, why was I going to school? Why were we doing all this stuff? Like, what was life? And that kind of just lasted until college, where I did a bunch of drugs and talked to some just really interesting people and had a lot of very interesting experiences. And most importantly, lived on my own and had to provide for myself. And
right.
Then moved in with a girl and lived with a girl in a tiny ass apartment bedroom and split a tiny, sharing, living with another person for a year. And that was when I started to actually grow up and start to look at things in a critical manner. I wasn't really doing anything. I dropped out of school, so I had all the time in the world. So I started playing video games. I know it sounds weird, but I started playing old Legend of Zelda titles, and I was like, what if I want to do this better? And I got into doing things critically and trying really hard. And then I was like, I wonder if I can apply this to knowledge. And I ended up with Heisenberg's Philosophy of Science. It was one of the first books on philosophy I ever read.
Okay.
And I just really, the basic kind of scientific assumption that all we know is that we don't really know much vibed with me,
right,
personally.
Well, it's been said by many people multiple times that we don't know way more than we do know.
Exactly.
And there's
right. and
virtue to admitting that. There's, the scientific process, is partly just admitting that you don't know something. And then the pursuit of knowledge through the scientific method is where we've gotten all of our advances.
Exactly.
So your religion, or your experience with religion then, was really kind of loose knit. It may not have been incredibly serious to you. It was a part of your life, and it was part of your upbringing. But how long did it take you to break away from that?
Well, okay. See, it's like, that's what I mean, is it was intensely personal. So, like, other than my mom, there was nobody in my life that was going to look down on me. You know what I mean?
Okay.
That I even feared, really, of coming out as an atheist, until I realized, honestly, the stigma that was attached to it. You know what I mean? Like, I realized I was kind of uncomfortable to tell other people, like, I don't really believe in all this stuff, just because I was afraid they would judge me.
Right.
But yeah, so I'm just trying to highlight, like, it was easy for me, like, much easier than it is for a lot of other people who grow up in this. Is, like, if you want to leave the Mormon church, for example, that's your whole life. That's,
right.
Like, it's so hard to do that. And for me, it was super easy. I was just like, oh, this doesn't make any fucking sense. It's not doing anything for me personally. I'm going elsewhere.
Okay.
So yeah, that was my experience with it. So I do understand that I probably underrate the personal felt oppression of living in a religious household, because, like, my girlfriend now, and especially her cousin, who I lived, like, we all live together now, grew up with very religious parents, and that's just, like, my girlfriend's mother doesn't know it. Like, they talk about politics. Just Trump, like, couldn't keep that genie in the bottle. She refused to bite her tongue on all that noise. But
right,
they would be deeply upset. At least her mom would, to find out that she was an atheist.
Okay, so then she's still in the closet to her family.
Yes. And her cousin is, like, 10 years older than me even, and he's, like, 35, and, is an adult, and his relationship with his mom is racked by ideological tension. And I guess for me, I see that tension really clearly in my life, more than I feel the oppression. I work with, a lot of working class people, right, for whom Christianity is not this philosophical doctrine, and who don't have these big questions that I did, and who can live happily and fulfilled in this framework and not hurt anybody.
Right, and in this area, that's not something that you wouldn't expect.
Logan's girlfriend and I were talking about the religious habits of St. Louisians, basically, and I thought that kind of indifferent Christianity, where it is a purely cultural kind of thing, is, if not uniquely St. Louisian, I think it is kind of like a suburban kind of ideal, you know what I mean, where it is just a tribal marker for them.
Right.
The tenets of the religion are extremely flexible. Like, if you talk to a lot of practicing Christians, it amounts to really no more thought than just be nice. And that's, if we're being honest, that's the ethical guideline that has guided most human beings throughout life, for better or for worse. But,
right, and I think that we can attribute that to purely secular causes. I mean, there's the concept of, anytime that I've talked about how, as an atheist, I really just stand on the grounds of, don't hurt people and hope that they won't hurt you, which is kind of this, golden rule that religion lays claim to, even though it predates religion, organized religion anyway.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, I would say, yeah, if somebody is carrying a view that they should essentially do no harm, and their religion is just kind of compartmentalized over here and sort of separate from the way that they actually treat people in practice, then, I wouldn't even argue religion. I mean, aside from, when we start talking about political lobbying and tax exemptions and stuff like that,
right.
Just religion.
Yeah, we'll find a lot of common ground there.
Yeah, just religion in general, I would say, I don't really have a problem with that. If you want to go to a church and you want to, what I would consider waste your Sunday and Wednesday night there, then, you can do that. The people that go to ball games are essentially doing the same thing.
Right.
But I think that where we got off track on that conversation was, I'm thinking about it with my background, a very, very strict Protestant, kind of Southern Baptist
Household
with a military father who kind of ran a tight ship.
Right.
And so, placed under that lens, I think that I sort of have maybe slightly different opinions on the whole thing. And I've seen kind of the dark side of religion, and I've actually been on the dark side of religion throughout my upbringing. And, I didn't really break from it until I was, probably around 24, 26 years old.
Right.
So it was just really deeply ingrained, and it was hard to let go of because it was all I had ever known.
Right.
And so when we start talking about the societal benefits of religion, then, I do think that there is a knee-jerk reaction there. And you had mentioned, oh, don't be a knee-jerk atheist. And I get where you were coming from. But I do think that, with the experience that I have and now, just trying to be a little more activist and outspoken about it, I think that I kind of do just immediately put it into that context and may have knee-jerk reactions to it.
Right. No, and I understand that sentiment, and especially from both you and Christine, who grew up in extremely different environments. For me, this is my experience with the dark side of religion has been purely academic, right?
Right.
It's been entirely through books and in a clinical kind of controlled manner. And so I do feel more comfortable, compromising with the devil to some degree, since we believe, and I think rightly, that our ideology is going to produce policies that are better for most people. We owe it to ourselves and to that ideology to fight that uphill battle and try and make an unreasonable case for reason.
I just don't know how we do that.
Well, I think it starts by building relationships with theists, basically, with Christians, and just getting to know them better. Because a lot of times they haven't met anyone who is an atheist, and when they do meet someone who's an atheist, we like to throw it in their face, and often we get real militant about it. And that is, honestly understandable, because a lot of us had absolutely shit experience with religion where we have just been, on the receiving end, the business end of the ideological stick, and it sucks. And you do feel absolutely justified in speaking truth to power. And I see that. And I felt that myself, even just looking at it through an academic lens and just reading about these experiences and not going through them so much myself. I feel that, dude. I'm sure not to your extent growing up with it, but I absolutely just with my own, struggles with authority, I see how uncomfortable that can be and how hard that is. But then at the same time, a lot of these people who do subscribe very heavily to this, and who for them it is a cultural thing. They haven't seen a positive atheist role model in their lives. I know that seems super corny or whatever, but they just really haven't met someone who matched their model of a normal person and someone they might want to be and was an atheist. That
Right.
was, to me, that was the best argument for an atheist, was when I was reading, brilliant men who were so clearly, and women who were just so clearly, masters of what they thought and had given such deep consideration to this. And they're like, no, dude, this is, it was just so inspiring. I think that trying to provide that for people in a way that matches their lives. So for me, it involves being good at my job, being nice to people, honestly practicing a lot of inherently Christian values, turning the other cheek, the humility doctrine, stuff like that. And I think it catches people off guard when it comes up, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm an atheist, socialist, radical, tax the rich. I'm coming for your toothbrush too. But I think that matters. And I've had really powerful, deep conversations, I think, with people who would have never opened up if we, hadn't gotten to know each other as people first before I brought ideology into it. I guess that's really all I mean, is that we do need to try to reach out more and talk to religious people, and we owe it to them and owe it to ourselves to not only get a better, picture of what it's like and why they would want to have those ideologies, but to give them a picture of what our lives is like and be like, hey, I don't believe in God. I treat people with respect. I don't murder anybody in my spare time. I work hard at my job. I'm not lazy. I think that's good for people to see. And so that's where I'm starting. And I know it's really long term, and it's really, that's not the kind of stuff people want, but I'm still learning. I've got my book on St. Louis. I'm going to map out how political power works here. See what I can do.
You and I would probably agree that because of the difficulty of, producing that narrative out of whole cloth, on the liberal side, that it would be better for progressives to engage with conservatives, with religious people, and try and affect that change from the inside out.
Yeah, or at least from like an equal footing. Like, I don't think we can quite go so far as, like infiltrating a religious organization.
Well, no, that's not what I would. that's not what I would say. I was suggesting. I don't want to go, like dress up in a Jesus loves you shirt and sing along with everybody and just drop little subtle hints for several years until they start getting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
do think that.
I think it sounds like you and I are pretty much on the same level here. I mean, there's really not a whole lot of disagreement. I think that possibly where the disagreement came from, and I guess I need to kind of acknowledge an emotional component of it, but given the backgrounds of a couple of people in that conversation and the thesis essentially that religion helps society, I think it was really easy to just kind of jump to personal experience and kind of just get into an argument for no reason.
Yeah, and I understand I was not as clear nearly as I could have been. I really never meant to be like religion is a net good for society, just that it has in fact done some good things that religion didn't. The fact that it was religious didn't inherently ruin. But yeah, no, that was just a shit show. I'm glad we got to have this conversation. It was very enjoyable.
I was raised in Protestant Christian churches since the Sunday after I was born. You can argue the validity of ever having been a true Christian now that I'm an atheist, but one thing I can say is that Jesus was as real to me as he could have been. I went to church and fellowshiped with other believers 2 times every Sunday, every Wednesday, every holiday, and vacation Bible school every year. I read the Bible from cover to cover twice with my family and took an Experiencing God class during my high school years when I started to feel like I was slipping in my relationship with him in an effort to reestablish communication with my Creator. I mean, my faith was always something I could discuss and share with people, and in fact, I seized every opportunity I could to try and convert all of my friends. That's what you do when you're a Christian. I mean, how could you not at least try to save people about whom you care, and when you know the alternative is for them to burn in a fiery pit for eternity? Who would want that? I'll admit I wasn't very successful. I agonized over the kids I tried to save, who, for whatever reason, just didn't seem to want what I was selling. I lost sleep over it. I didn't understand why a person wouldn't accept this gift I was offering. My best friend from middle school to this day modeled the kind of tolerant and patient friendship that left a real impression on me. His family was completely non-religious, and even so, I loved being around them. I called his mom Mom. But for all my admiration of these people, there was a nagging sense of dread that this family was doomed. My parents and my church reinforced this idea. My beliefs reinforced this idea, but my best friend put me at odds with my faith. He was a good person. He was fun, and I felt like he cared about me. How could someone destined for hell be like that? To his credit, he attended church with me when I invited him. He could have done anything else with his Sundays, and sometimes Wednesday nights. But he tagged along and spent time with me. One Wednesday night in high school, we decided that we didn't want to sit in class, and instead we hid out in this coat closet playing our Game Boys until we got caught and had to explain ourselves to my dad. That was pretty bad. But through all of this, my best friend persevered, and he unknowingly laid the foundation for my eventual transition to atheism. I stayed in my religion for another 10 years after high school graduation. I did a stint in the Army. I got married. I had a son. And I got divorced. But through all of this, my best friend was there for me. He was still the same person. I could reach out to him, and he was real. After having been out of the church for a few years, I started realizing that my religion hadn't really made a difference in my life one way or the other. It was easier not to be in church than to be in church. It made more sense to keep that 10% of my income than give it away to an organization that used it to pay a pastor's salary and add new wings onto a church building. Nothing about my life or the world around me changed as a result, but my younger self would have expected it to crumble around me as I invited demons into my life. For several years, I was confused about what I believed, but I always remembered my best friend. He wasn't conflicted. He wasn't agonizing the way I was. Finally, in my mid-20s, I realized that I'd never really heard the voice of God. I'd never had a relationship with Jesus. Religion had never actually done anything or explained anything for me. I'd been figuring things out as I went along, just like everybody else does, and my views on the world were evolving with my experience of the world, the bigger world outside of my religious bubble. I would say I was becoming a better person. Now, this monologue is an abbreviated account of my deconversion, but that's because I'm not really talking about my deconversion. I'm talking about my best friend, who unwittingly helped me break the shackles of old-timey religion and become an empathetic, rational atheist. I'm talking about my best friend, who showed me that Jesus wasn't what made you a good person. You were just a good person. So this monologue is, then, a thank you letter to my best friend, who gave me the most precious gift of all, my freedom. Random verse. Random verse. Random verse. Random verse. Our random verse for today is Matthew 23:9. It goes like this. And call no man your father upon the earth, for one is your Father, which is in heaven. So Jesus is talking to his disciples in front of a group of people and highlighting the hypocrisy of the Pharisees and their self-importance. This statement is strange.
It kind of sounds to me like God is saying that fathers don't exist, except for me. I'm your only father.
Okay, and see, it's funny because you haven't read the Bible, and that's it. Even having read the Bible, I read this verse and I'm like, what are you even talking about? So there are a couple of reasons that it's weird, and the first one is it's a complete non sequitur. So if you put this verse in context, this whole thing is about these peacock men that walk around and make sure everybody knows how uber religious they are and how awesome they are at religioning, and this one falls right in between two statements that Jesus makes about not being called rabbi, because Jesus is the one rabbi, the teacher, and then he says you can't be called master because Jesus is your master, and this is Jesus talking.
Weird.
Yeah, and this verse, it doesn't even say that you shouldn't be called father. It says you shouldn't call other people father.
So Jesus talks about himself in the third person and doesn't want anybody to have dads.
Yes, and he signs all of his tweets J.
My boy Jay. Jay Zeus. Oh man. Yeah, this is one of those ones that just, obviously I don't have any context at all when it comes to like Bible verses. People just whip things out and I'm like, oh, that's great, I guess. But, I mean, this is one of those things that especially just does not make any sense at all, even given the context. Especially if it's, like, in the middle. It's like somebody just talking to you like, hey, the other day I went to go get some frozen yogurt, and also, screw you, why did you call me that? And the frozen yogurt was great, by the way.
Yeah, and that's almost exactly what this verse is in context. Because it's just this little, again, it's a non sequitur. It just doesn't even fit into the conversation that he's having.
One of the common things, like themes that we have when we talk about the Bible and the way that the Bible is written is like almost compared to like Shakespearean poetry. And this is not one of those things. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, truly, it doesn't make sense. So even without qualification, this statement presumes that you shouldn't even call your own father, even though he's actually your father. And
well, hold on.
Now father doesn't even sound like a real word. Does
that include slang terms for father? Like dad or pops?
Or poppy?
Am I just supposed to not call you... You're just bro now. My boy John. That's it. No more dad.
No, I'm not John to you. I'm dad.
No. You're my boy John. You can thank the Bible for that. The Bible taught me not to call you father.
Son of a... All right. Next time I see Jesus,
beat that guy up.
I got a bone to pick with that guy. All right, so one other thing about this verse is that it just absolutely offers no wisdom whatsoever. Christians love to say that Jesus' teachings are full of wisdom. They're just so inspiring. But aside from urging humility in the surrounding verses in the context for this statement is completely devoid of any actual wisdom or any actionable intelligence.
Well, I don't know. I feel like from, obviously not the perspective of somebody who's religious because I know nothing about that, but I feel like this sort of goes along the lines of like the whole not taking the Lord's name in vain and not having other idols or gods that you worship or stuff like that. I feel like this is kind of along the same lines, although this is a lot weirder than the typical ones that are like, don't worship other people, because this one's like, don't call people father, even though fathers exist.
Right. Yeah, fathers are definitely a thing. So, yeah, I mean, if you take it back old school to the Old Testament, and you get a verse like, thou shalt have no other gods before me, for I, the Lord, am a jealous God, then, I mean, that's even still weird. But at least you can understand where it's coming from. I mean, let's assume that we're not even talking about any real, actual other gods. We're just talking about, like, people making up things to worship.
Like Britney Spears.
Money, or celebrities, or cars, or whatever it is. Anything that takes your focus away from worshiping God would obviously be a sin. It would be a problem for a god. But to say you shouldn't call anyone father because God is your father,
yeah, it's definitely weird.
I got nothing.
Yeah, I give this verse a 2 out of 10 in the logic department.
All right. So
good talk.
Now that we've learned more nothing from Jesus, we can wrap up the segment and we can wrap up this episode.
Avengers disassemble.
There you go. Thank you for listening this week. I want to thank my tallest son for not ever murdering me in my sleep. And I want to thank my lovely girlfriend for lending her sexy voice to the podcast, as well as Logan's lovely girlfriend for making this podcast artsy. We'll be back next week with another episode, and if you like what you just heard and want to support our little enterprise, you can head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/wayward. The title music for this podcast was created by Austin Cologne and used with permission. This podcast is a media production of Willisware LLC, all rights.
This has been The Wayward Willis. If you liked what you just heard and you want more of Jon and Logan, you can follow us on Twitter at Wayward Willis, Facebook at facebook.com/thewaywardwillis, or at willisweb.com. If you want to help the show and have a few extra dollars, you can donate per episode or per month on Patreon at patreon.com/wayward. We'll be back next week.